The plasma bolt seared through the hull of Krelax's scout ship like it was made of paper. Warning signals blared through the cockpit as his vessel spiraled toward the unfamiliar blue-green planet below. The proud warrior of the Defying Empire had never expected his reconnaissance mission to end like this, shot down by pirates in an uncharted system, far from any Imperial support. As his ship burned through the atmosphere, Krelax's six-fingered hands danced across the controls, fighting for any semblance of stability. His crystalline exoskeleton, usually gleaming with bioluminescent patterns of authority and rank, now pulsed erratically with pain and fear. The ground rushed up to meet him with terrifying speed. The impact was catastrophic. Metal tore through metal, and Krelax felt something in his thoracic cavity crack. When the wreckage finally settled, he found himself pinned under twisted bulkheads, unable to move his lower limbs. The bioelectric signals that usually flowed smoothly through his crystalline form were now jarringly silent below his midsection. Hours passed. His ship's emergency beacon pulsed weakly into space, but Krelax knew the truth. No Vectheri ship would reach him in time. The pirates who shot him down would likely return to finish the job, or worse, strip his ship for parts while he still lived. As consciousness faded in and out, he noticed something unusual on his remaining functional scanner. Approaching vehicles, but of no design he recognized. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force had been leading a routine patrol when the fireball streaked across the morning sky. Whatever it was, it had come down in her sector, and protocol demanded investigation. As her squad's APCs approached the crash site, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be anything but routine. Movement detected inside the wreck, Sarge. Private Rodriguez reported from his scanner station. One life sign, but it's like nothing in our database. Sarah's jaw tightened. First contact scenarios were above her pay grade, but someone was in there, possibly dying. Full hazmat protocols, people. We're going in. The crashed vessel was unlike anything Sarah had seen in her 12 years of service. Its architecture seemed to flow like frozen liquid, with surfaces that shimmered despite the smoke damage. As her team cut through the twisted entry point, she heard something, a sound between a crystalline chime and a groan of pain. When they found Krelax, several of her squad instinctively raised their weapons. The alien was massive, easily 8 feet tall, even crumpled in the wreckage. Its body appeared to be made of living crystal, with intricate patterns of light pulsing beneath translucent surfaces. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't its alienness. It was the look in its multifaceted eyes. Pain knew no species barrier. "Stand down," she ordered, stepping forward. "He's injured." The alien's lights flickered in what Sarah would later learn was surprise. It spoke, and while the words were unintelligible, the tone was universal, a warrior acknowledging another warrior. "Get the medical team in here," Sarah commanded. "And someone contact command. Tell them." She paused, looking at the wounded alien. "Tell them we're about to complicate their day." The next few hours were chaos. Military protocol demanded the crash site be quarantined. Scientific teams wanted the alien studied. Security wanted it contained. But Sarah saw something else. A fellow soldier who had fought until the end and now needed help. Making her decision, she stayed with Krelax as the medical teams worked to stabilize him. She noticed how his crystalline form seemed to respond to electrical impulses, how the patterns of light within him grew stronger when they applied certain frequencies. It was like nothing in human medical experience, but Sarah recognized the will to live when she saw it. When the order finally came to transport the alien to a secure facility, Sarah made sure she was assigned to the detail. As they lifted off, she caught Krelax watching her with those strange eyes. The patterns of light in his body had shifted, forming what seemed like deliberate signals. She didn't need a translator to understand. It was a warrior's gratitude. What neither of them knew then was that this chance encounter would not only change their lives, but reshape the relationship between their species. The story of a human soldier who chose compassion over protocol and an alien warrior who learned that strength comes in many forms was about to begin. The secure medical facility beneath Fort Armstrong hummed with activity. Through reinforced observation windows, scientists and military personnel watched in fascination as the crystalline alien's body pulsed with waves of bioluminescence. But Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen watched something else. The way Krelax's lights dimmed whenever the doctors discussed his condition, as if he wasn't there. 3 weeks had passed since the crash, and while universal translators were making progress with the Vectheri language, trust proved harder to translate than words. Sarah had fought to remain involved, arguing that having a familiar presence might help their unusual patient. In truth, she couldn't shake the responsibility she felt for the wounded warrior. The damage to his crystalline matrix is extensive, Dr. Hammond explained during one briefing, pointing to detailed scans. The crash severed key pathways that carry bioelectric signals through his body. In human terms, he's paralyzed from mid-torso down. Sarah noticed Krelax's upper body tense at the word paralyzed, even though it had been spoken in English. Some concepts, it seemed, were universal. But you can help him, right? She asked. Hammond's hesitation spoke volumes. We barely understand his biology. Any attempt at treatment could make things worse. The safest option is to keep him stable until his people respond to our broadcasts. That night, Sarah stayed late at the facility, watching Krelax through the observation window. His lights had fallen into the dim, erratic pattern she'd come to associate with distress. Making a decision, she entered his room. I know you understand more than you let on, she said, pulling up a chair. And I know what it's like to feel trapped. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a prosthetic forearm. Lost this in the Mars Rebellion. Doctors said I'd never serve in the field again. They were wrong. Krelax's lights shifted, forming patterns she hadn't seen before. The translator on her wrist crackled to life, converting crystalline harmonics into rough English. Your kind repairs themselves with machines. We adapt. We heal. We find ways to keep fighting. Sarah replied. And we're going to help you do the same. The patterns in Krelax's body intensified. My people would not try. Damaged warriors are. He paused, the lights dimming. Discharge. Retired to contemplation chambers. Well, you're not with your people right now, Sarah said firmly. You're with humans. And we don't give up on warriors, any warriors. Over the next few days, Sarah worked with Dr. Hammond and his team to understand Vectheri biology. Krelax's species had evolved from crystalline life forms, their bodies conducting complex bioelectric signals through lattices of living crystal. In theory, the damaged pathways could be repaired, but it would require technology that didn't exist yet. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During one of their conversations, Krelax mentioned how young Vectheri would practice controlling their internal light patterns by interfacing with crystalline training matrices. Sarah convinced Hammond to study the concept, leading to the development of an experimental neural interface that could bridge the damaged sections of Krelax's crystalline matrix. Not everyone supported these efforts. Some military officials argued that helping Krelax might give away too much about human medical technology. Others feared that healing him would only send a stronger potential enemy back to his people. But Sarah stood her ground. He crashed on our planet, she argued in one heated meeting. How we treat him will tell his people everything they need to know about humanity. Do we want them to see us as people who help those in need, or as people who let a wounded warrior suffer because we're afraid? The patterns of light flowing through Krelax's body grew stronger with each successful test of the interface. Sarah spent hours helping him relearn control of his lower limbs, the neural bridge slowly teaching his crystalline matrix new pathways for its bioelectric signals. Sometimes the pain would overwhelm him, his lights flickering chaotically, but he never quit. Why do you help? He asked her one evening, after a particularly difficult session. Your leaders do not approve. Your doctors say it is risky. Sarah thought about all the wounded soldiers she'd served with, All the times humanity's determination had overcome seemingly impossible odds. Because that's what humans do, she replied. We see someone fighting to survive, to recover, to keep going despite everything. And we fight alongside them. Krulax's lights formed a pattern she'd never seen before. The translator struggled for a moment before rendering. Then I am fortunate to have crashed among humans. What neither of them realized was that their growing trust would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. As Krulax grew stronger, signals from deep space indicated that the Vectheri Empire had finally noticed their missing warrior. And their response would force both Sarah and Krulax to prove that the bonds forged between their species were stronger than ancient prejudices and fear. The emergency klaxons at Fort Armstrong blared to life at 300 hours. Sarah was already awake, reviewing Krulax's latest progress reports, when her comm unit lit up with urgent notifications. A Vectheri warship had appeared at the edge of the solar system, broadcasting demands for the return of their property. Sarah's blood ran cold at that last word. Over the past weeks, she'd learned much about Vectheri culture from Krulax. Their empire valued perfection above all else. Damaged warriors weren't just retired, they were erased from military records, treated as if they'd never existed. The approaching ship wasn't coming to rescue Krulax. They were coming to remove what they saw as an embarrassment. She found Krulax in the therapy room, using the neural interface to practice standing. His crystalline form hummed with effort, new pathways of light pulsing through previously dark sections of his lower body. He turned his multifaceted eyes toward her, immediately reading the tension in her stance. "They're here, aren't they?" he asked, his translator rendering the crystalline harmonics of his voice into tired English. "The Empire has come to reclaim its lost property." "Like hell they will," Sarah growled, surprising herself with the ferocity in her voice. "You're not property. You're a warrior who's fought harder than anyone I've ever seen to recover." The lights within Krulax's form shifted to a pattern she'd come to recognize as bitter amusement. "The Empire disagrees. In their eyes, I am already dead. The moment my spine shattered in the crash, I ceased to be a warrior. I became a reminder of imperfection, something to be removed and forgotten." "Then they never deserved you," Sarah said firmly. She moved to the therapy room's control panel, beginning to disconnect the monitoring equipment. "Because I've seen more warrior spirit in you during these therapy sessions than in entire platoons of soldiers I've served with." Krulax's lights pulsed with confusion. "What are you doing?" "Breaking about 15 protocols," Sarah replied, helping him disconnect from the neural interface. "The brass upstairs is already talking about diplomatic solutions and avoiding interstellar incidents. They'll hand you over to maintain peace." "As they should," Krulax said, though his lights betrayed his fear. "One damaged warrior is not worth risking war." Sarah pulled up the latest scan results on her tablet. "Look at these readings. The neural interface isn't just bridging your damaged pathways. It's teaching your crystalline matrix to grow new ones. In a few more weeks, you might not need the interface at all. Your people think you're unfixable, but they're wrong." She met his gaze steadily. "You can be the proof that their entire philosophy of discarding the wounded is wrong, but not if they take you now." Alarms continued to blare through the facility as Sarah initiated her plan. She'd spent 12 years in the UEDF, building a network of trusted contacts and learning every procedure, including how to bypass them. With the help of a sympathetic doctor and 2 of her original squad members, she managed to get Krulax to a secure sublevel of the facility just as the first Vectheri representatives were touching down on the surface. The next 48 hours were a blur of close calls and improvised solutions. While diplomats argued overhead, Sarah and her small team worked to maintain Krulax's treatment regime. The neural interface was portable, but it required massive amounts of power. They'd set up a makeshift therapy room in an abandoned maintenance area, using jury-rigged equipment to continue his rehabilitation. "The Empire will not stop searching," Krulax warned during one session, his lights flickering with exhaustion as he forced his legs to take another step. "They are. persistent when it comes to removing signs of weakness. "Good thing you're not weak then," Sarah replied, monitoring the interface's power levels. "And good thing humans are even more persistent, especially when someone tells us something's impossible." But as they worked in their underground sanctuary, neither could ignore the growing tensions above. The Vectheri representatives had gone from diplomatic requests to thinly veiled threats. More ships were gathering at the edge of the solar system. The Earth Defense Council was split between those who wanted to protect their patient and those who feared provoking an interstellar war. Sarah knew they were running out of time. The neural interface was working. Krelax could now stand and walk short distances without support, but he wasn't strong enough yet to face his people. Or was he? As she watched him struggle through another therapy session, his determination never wavering despite the pain, she began to see another way. "Your people respect strength above all else, right?" she asked, an idea forming. Krelax's lights pulsed in agreement. "It is the foundation of our society. The strong lead the weak." He didn't finish the sentence. "Then maybe it's time to show them what real strength looks like," Sarah said, pulling up the facility's communications protocols on her tablet. "Not the strength of a perfect crystalline form, but the strength of refusing to be broken, of fighting back from an injury that was supposed to be fatal." She looked at her friend, the warrior who had taught her as much about courage as she taught him about persistence. "What do you say we give the Empire a lesson in human-style rehabilitation?" Krelax's form began to pulse with a new pattern, one that Sarah had never seen before, but instinctively recognized. It was the light of hope. The main conference chamber of Fort Armstrong buzzed with tension. On one side stood the Vectheri delegation, their crystalline forms pulsing with barely contained anger. On the other, Earth Defense Force officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Empire's ultimatum had been clear: hand over the damaged warrior, or face consequences. Sarah watched it all through the facility's security feeds from their hidden sanctuary below. She checked the neural interface's readings one last time. Everything was perfect. Better than perfect. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Krelax, who stood beside her without support for the first time since his crash. His crystalline form hummed with new strength, pathways of light flowing smoothly through once damaged sections. "No," he replied, his translator rendering a slight tremor in his harmonics. "But you have taught me that certainty is not the same as strength." He turned his multifaceted eyes toward her. "My people believe that damage cannot be overcome, only discarded. It is time they learned otherwise." Above them, the Vectheri ambassador's voice rang through the chamber. "This is a simple matter. The damaged one is Empire property. Its continued existence brings shame upon our species. Surrender it, and we shall depart your system peacefully." Sarah's hand tightened on her tablet. Over the weeks of rehabilitation, she'd learned to read Vectheri light patterns like a second language. The ambassador's crystalline form blazed with the patterns of absolute authority and absolute contempt. "Now," she said softly. Krelax touched the communicator they'd modified to work with his crystalline biology. His voice boomed through the conference chamber speakers, causing both human and Vectheri representatives to jump. "I am not property," he declared in perfect Vectheri harmonics. "I am Krelax, battle leader of the 3rd Expeditionary Force, and I challenge the Empire's judgment." The ambassador's lights flickered in shock. "The damaged one dares to speak. This is unprecedented." "What's unprecedented?" Sarah's voice joined Krelax's over the comm. "Is that you're about to witness the results of human and Vectheri cooperation. Ambassador, you might want to step back from that podium." Before anyone could react, the floor panels in the center of the conference chamber slid open. A platform rose from below, carrying Krelax and Sarah. The Vectheri delegation's lights pulsed with shock as Krelax stepped forward, walking smoothly, his crystalline form glowing with strength. "Impossible," the ambassador whispered, his translator struggling with his discordant harmonics. The damage was fatal. The pathways were severed. "Impossible by Empire standards," Krelax agreed. His lights formed patterns of challenge, ancient signals that every Vecthera warrior would recognize. But humans do not accept impossible. They adapt. They innovate. They heal what we would discard. To demonstrate, he moved through a series of complex warrior stances, his recovered limbs responding perfectly. The neural interface, now barely visible against his crystalline form, pulsed in sync with his movements. Each motion was a declaration of defiance against the Empire's beliefs. "Your scanners will confirm that my crystalline matrix is healing," he continued. "Not merely bridged or bypassed, but actually regenerating along new pathways." The human's neural interface technology, combined with their understanding of biological recovery, has achieved what our empire declared impossible. Sarah stepped forward, standing proudly beside her friend. "We've documented every step of the rehabilitation process. The neural interface design, the therapy protocols, everything. Knowledge that could help countless wounded Vecthera warriors, if you're willing to accept that your current approach might be wrong." The ambassador's lights shifted through patterns of confusion, anger, and, briefly, wonder. Other members of the delegation were displaying signs that Sarah had learned to read as intense interest. Several were already running scans of Krelax's restored form. "This is more than about one wounded warrior," Sarah continued. "This is about two species learning from each other. Your crystalline biology taught us new ways to think about neural pathways and recovery. Our determination to help the wounded taught you that damage doesn't have to mean defeat." Krelax moved to stand at the edge of the platform, his lights pulsing with authority that matched the ambassador's. "I challenge the Empire's policy on wounded warriors. By ancient law, if I can prove my fitness for duty, that challenge must be heard." The ambassador's form dimmed slightly. He knew the law as well as Krelax did. More importantly, every Vectheri in the room had just witnessed something they had believed impossible. A damaged warrior, walking again, fighting again, living again. "The human speaks of sharing knowledge," one of the delegation's scientists said, his lights showing patterns of barely contained excitement. "Ambassador, the potential applications are dangerous," the ambassador cut in. "They threaten our entire approach to warfare and recovery." He paused, his lights shifting. "And perhaps that threat is long overdue." Sarah felt the tension in the room shift. She glanced at Krelax, seeing his lights pulse with what she now knew was cautious hope. They weren't out of danger yet. The Empire's ships still hung in orbit, and centuries of tradition wouldn't change in a single day. But they had done what they set out to do, prove that together, humans and Vectheri could achieve the impossible. "Perhaps," the ambassador said finally, his lights forming patterns of formal recognition, "it is time for the Empire to learn some new definitions of strength." 6 months after the confrontation at Fort Armstrong, Sarah stood at attention in the newly constructed Vectheri Human Medical Center. Through the facility's crystalline windows, she could see both human and Vectheri ships docked at the orbital station, their crews working together with a comfort that would have seemed impossible less than a year ago. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," Krelax said, his translator now perfectly tuned to his crystalline harmonics. "Or should I say, Director Chen." Sarah relaxed, smiling at her friend. Krelax's form pulsed with healthy light patterns, the neural interface now barely visible against his restored crystalline matrix. He moved with the same fluid grace he possessed before his crash, though now his movements carried a new kind of strength, one born of overcoming rather than perfection. "Still getting used to the title," she admitted. "When they proposed this joint rehabilitation center, I thought they'd want someone with more medical experience in charge. They wanted someone who could see potential where others saw only damage," Krelax replied. His lights formed patterns she'd learned to read as pride. "Someone who could teach both our species that healing is not about returning to what was, but building something new." They walked together through the facility's main ward. In each room, injured warriors, both human and Vectheri, worked with teams of doctors and therapists from both species. The neural interface technology that had saved Krelax had been refined and improved through collaboration, leading to breakthroughs in treatment for both crystalline and human nervous system injuries. The Empire's Council of Warriors meets next week to vote on the final changes to our military protocols. Krelax said as they reached the observation deck. The old laws about discarding damaged warriors will be officially struck down. In their place, new procedures for rehabilitation and recovery. His lights flickered with what Sarah now recognized as amusement. They're calling it the human approach. Better than calling it the impossible approach, Sarah joked, remembering how many times they'd heard that word during Krelax's recovery. She paused, looking out at the earth below. Did you ever imagine, when you were falling out of the sky that day, that your crash would change everything? I imagined only death, Krelax admitted, his lights dimming briefly at the memory. Or worse, the shame of survival without purpose. Instead, I found something neither of our species fully understood before. What's that? That true strength isn't about being unbreakable, he said, turning his multifaceted eyes toward her. It's about what you choose to become after breaking. Humans taught us that. You taught me that. A commotion at the far end of the deck drew their attention. A young Vectheri warrior was taking their first steps after a severe injury, their crystalline form glowing with effort. Supporting them was a human physical therapist, encouraging them with the same determination Sarah had shown during Krelax's rehabilitation. The Empire feared that helping wounded warriors would make us weak, Krelax observed. Instead, it has made both our species stronger. Every recovered warrior carries your lesson forward. That impossible is just a word for something we haven't tried hard enough to achieve. Sarah watched as the young warrior completed their first lap of the deck, their lights pulsing with triumph. Around them, other patients, human and Vectheri alike, flashed lights or applauded in celebration. This was what they had fought for, what they had risked everything to prove possible. You know, she said, when I first found you in that crashed ship, all I wanted to do was help one wounded warrior. I never imagined we'd end up starting a revolution in interspecies medicine. And I never imagined that being shot down by pirates would lead to the greatest victory of my career. Krelax replied, his lights forming patterns of joy and contentment. Though perhaps that's the most important lesson of all, that our greatest achievements often come from our darkest moments, if we're brave enough to keep fighting through them. As they stood together, watching the ongoing work of healing and recovery, Sarah reflected on how far they'd come. A human soldier who couldn't ignore a wounded warrior, an alien who refused to accept his society's judgment, and the countless others who had helped them prove that compassion and determination could overcome any barrier, even those between species. The next group of human Vectheri medical students arrives tomorrow, Sarah said finally. Want to help me tell them our story? Krelax's form pulsed with the now familiar pattern of friendship and purpose. Of course. After all, they should know that the impossible is just the beginning of what we can achieve together. Above them, Earth and the Vectheri ships shared the same sky, a testament to how far both species had come and a promise of what they could still accomplish. The war that everyone had feared had never materialized. Instead, two warrior cultures had learned from each other, growing stronger not through conflict, but through healing. And it had all started with a crash, a choice, and the simple human belief that no warrior should be left behind.